Welcome back to Community Media Day. We're calling it Open Mic Free Speech or Free Speech Open Mic. And I'm really pleased that we have this esteemed guest with us today. She's also a friend. Her name is Kelly Matthews. She is an academic, a writer, a poet, and we're pleased to have you here to read some poetry. Really, very honored that you could make it here today. What does free speech mean to you, Kelly? And you're also, I should have said, you're a professor at Framingham State.
That's right.
Teaching literature.
I teach literature, and my focus is really on Irish literature, so I've brought some poems from Ireland today. But if you ask me what free speech means, I would say it's the right to ask questions and the right to speak up when something seems wrong in our society. And that's part of why I like studying Irish literature, because poets and writers tend to be very engaged in their society and speaking out.
Would you say that free speech in Ireland has a different meaning or has a different perspective, a different dimension than in here in terms of their history?
I think to some extent it does. I also think the role of writers has been much more prominent in Irish society. I'll start by reading W.B. Yeats, who was a Nobel Prize winning poet and also a senator in the Irish Senate.
We don't have many of those in our Senate, do we?
And there's not many poets that we could probably name off the top of our heads, living American poets, whereas in Ireland, the poets that are living and writing today are generally well known and are household names.
Do you think we could find a way to elect more poets to Congress?
I think it would be such a different world if we did.
I agree.
It would be great.
Well, thank you again for coming. I'm going to let you take it away from
All
here.
right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And thanks to the Belmont Media Center for having me. I forgot to say I also host an occasional podcast, the Off the Page series for writers of books on various subjects. And I'm going to read a few poems by writers from Ireland, not political poems today. I thought I would read a few love poems, starting with W.B. Yeats, as I said, Nobel Prize winning poet. As a young man, he was enamored of a woman named Maud Gunn, who was his friend throughout his life, but she never consented to marry him. He asked her 6 times, we think, and every time she said no, but he continued to write poems about her. So this one is called When You Are Old. When you are old and gray and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace and loved your beauty with love false or true. But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled and paced upon the mountains overhead and hid his face amid a crowd of stars. Yeats also wrote poems that were focused on Irish folklore. So this is a love poem, but taking the voice of a character named Angus, who's part of the mythical legend tradition of Ireland. And this poem is called The Song of Wandering Angus. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing, and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. I just love the sound of that poem, and I think it's amazing that Yeats can channel those thoughts about being old when he actually was quite a young man when he wrote those. I'll read a poem by someone who was young when he wrote this, and this is Seamus Heaney, also a Nobel Prize winning poet. from Ireland who died sadly 5 years ago, and who used to teach locally at Harvard University, taught poetry workshops and also classes in Irish and British poetry. And this is a poem he wrote at the time of his wedding to his wife, Mari Heaney, and it's simply called Poem for Mari. Love, I shall perfect for you the child who diligently potters in my brain, digging with heavy spade till sods were piled, or puddling through muck in a deep drain. Yearly I would sow my yard-long garden. I'd strip a layer of sods to build the wall that was to keep out sow and pecking hen. Yearly admitting these, the sods would fall. Or in the sucking clabber I would splash delightedly and dam the flowing drain. But always my bastions of clay and mush would burst before the rising autumn rain. Love, you shall perfect for me this child whose small imperfect limits would keep breaking. Within new limits now, arrange the world and square the circle, 4 walls and a ring. I think that's a lovely poem also. And I thought I would read a couple of poems by poets who are still living. And one of these is Derek Mahon, who's not very well known in the United States. He's from Northern Ireland. And actually, this is a poem that my husband and I chose to have read on our wedding day. And we keep coming back to it again and again. It's called Everything is Going to Be All Right. How should I not be glad to contemplate the clouds clearing beyond the dormer window and a high tide reflected on the ceiling? There will be dying, but there is no need to go into that. The poems flow from the hand unbidden, and the hidden source is the watchful heart. The sun rises in spite of everything, and the far cities are beautiful and bright. I lie here in a riot of sunlight, watching the day break and the clouds flying. Everything is going to be all right. I just love the simplicity of that poem and the message and the images of nature combined with, I think, a really hopeful tone at the end. And lastly, I'm going to read one last poem by a living poet, Michael Longley. And I should say, for promotional purposes, I'm actually bringing Michael Longley to Boston in March of 2019. He'll be giving a reading at the Boston Public Library on March 21st. Mark your calendars, 6 o'clock in the evening. But he's also a poet who's been very engaged politically and socially in his home country of Northern Ireland. And at the time of the IRA ceasefire in 1994, that very same week, he published a poem called Ceasefire, drawing upon heroic literature, actually drawing upon a scene from the Iliad by Homer. And I think this poem, in a way, talks about a different form of love and the love that can be present in a scene of almost reconciliation or near forgiveness. It's not a neat package, but it's an interesting, I think, complex poem and something for us to think about during times of division, because that's certainly what was happening in Northern Ireland at the time that Michael Longley wrote this poem. And so to bring out those ideas, he actually turned back to classical literature and to Homer, and has created a poem that I think is really timeless. And it's called Ceasefire. Put in mind of his own father and moved to tears, Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam curled up at his feet and wept with him until their sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed and, for the old king's sake, laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry, wrapped like a present, home to Troy at daybreak. When they had eaten together, it pleased them both to stare at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles built like a god, Priam good-looking still and full of conversation, who earlier had sighed, I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son. So thank you very much for listening, and thanks to the Belmont Media Center for hosting.